All right, welcome back everybody. If this is your first time to the channel, welcome to Notes to Fret, where we are all about turning theory into riffs. And in this video, what we're going to do is dive into the sounds of the Mixolydian mode. We're going to look at the variations in this major mode of the actual chord construction, as well as diving into the actual chord progressions that allow us to really dive in and put a piece of music together with the Mixolydian mode that definitely sounds unique and very Mixolydian-ish, if you will. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right in. Here, we're looking at the circle of fifths on the left, and we are going to be obviously talking about C major scale because we're doing a comparison of the C Ionian, a major scale, with C Mixolydian, another major mode, right? So, with that being said, just really quick review. Hopefully a lot of you got a chance to review, but just to kind of make certain. Here, when we look at the difference between the scales of Ionian and Mixolydian, we can see at the end we've got this whole step followed by a half step, whereas Mixolydian we have a half step followed by a whole step. And that's what ultimately gives us our B flat. And that B flat, the impact of that is we wind up with a diminished third, as opposed to a minor third. Then we wind up with a minor fifth as opposed to a major fifth. And we wind up with a major seventh as opposed to a diminished seventh, right? So here, when we're comparing these two modes, obviously the E minor in the C major and the E diminished in the C Mixolydian, right? And then in the Ionian mode, we have G major. In Mixolydian, we have G minor. And in Ionian, we have B diminished. And down in Mixolydian, we have B flat major, okay? And that's kind of the high level review that we spoke about, that we get across pretty quickly. But what I want to do now, jumping into the sounds, is I first want to get our ear used to some of these differences in a little bit of isolation, and then we can move on and talk about some of the chord progressions. So with that, what I want to do first is jump right in and let's listen to a comparison between the B diminished and the B flat major. Let's just go ahead and, like I said, we're going to do these individually and then we'll move on to the chord progressions. So let's go ahead and jump into the sound differences between B diminished and B flat major. All right, so first what we're going to do is take a listen to the difference between our B diminished, which is part of our C Ionian mode, and the B flat major. Okay, so first the B diminished. Versus the B flat major. So again, B diminished, B flat major. Okay, so definitely a distinct difference between those two. So with that, let's go ahead and now move into our third position, which in this case is our E diminished. Why is it diminished? Because we had to flatten the fifth, so our fifth became diminished, right? So let's go ahead and jump in so we start to understand the difference, or really have our ears understand the difference between E minor and E diminished. So let's go ahead and jump in and hear that now. Okay, now we're going to listen to the difference between our E diminished, or really our E minor from our C Ionian mode, to our E diminished in our C Mixolydian mode. So first, the E minor. Followed by the E diminished. So again, E minor, E diminished. Okay, so definitely, you know, it's got that diminished sound, so you can, I'm sure that your ear can definitely hear the difference between the E minor and the E diminished on that one. And then finally, for the triads, what I want to do now is jump in and really understand and listen to the difference between the G major and G minor, right? Because we flattened the third, so therefore G major became a G minor. This is a big one because this is our dominant position, right? And changing anything in that dominant position, right? Dominant's always what gets us back to the tonic. If you hit the 1, 4, 5 back to 1, right? That's a big thing. So this definitely is going to have some pretty significant impact on our sounds that we're going to ultimately be able to pull out of the Mixolydian mode. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in, listen to the differences between G major and G minor. Okay, next what we're going to do is we're going to listen to the difference between the G major, which is part of our C Ionian mode, and our G minor. So first, the G major. That's from our Ionian mode. Followed now by our G minor, which is in our Mixolydian mode. So again, comparing the two, first G major, followed by G minor. Okay, so we got to explore that. You know, there's nuances in there, but it really is about what we get out of the dominant bringing us back to our tonic, right? Listening to the difference between G major and G minor, you know, probably pretty easy on the ears, but just remember, it's going to matter what it brings us back to, how we ultimately wind up resolving things. So just keep that in mind. Next, what I want to do is talk about the tonic from the perspective of our seventh chords. And here's what I mean. When we're looking at C Ionian, if we make that as extended past just a triad and make it a seventh chord, we get a C major seventh, okay? Now, when we came up to the fifth position in Ionian at the top, we have G major. And if we made that a seventh chord, we wound up with G dominant seventh. Okay, just keep that in mind. If you haven't seen the video on the sevenths, realize that the dominant position you wind up with, and the major scale, you wind up with a dominant seventh. Now, why is that relevant? Well, when we're talking about the tonic, here in Ionian, it's a C major seventh. But when we're talking about Mixolydian, down at the bottom, it is a C dominant seventh, which means the tonic of our scale in Mixolydian is a dominant seventh, which is just kind of weird, right? Because the dominant seventh is supposed to be in the dominant position or the fifth position. But when we go into Mixolydian, our tonic is a dominant seventh. So, you know, that right off the bat is gonna, you know, that's gonna play some interesting little parts in our music when we're using Mixolydian, if we start extending and using the seventh chords. So with that, what I want to do now is go ahead and let's listen to the differences between the C major seventh and the C dominant seventh. Okay, now looking at our seventh chords in our C Ionian mode, we are going to have a C major seventh. That was our C major 7th from our Ionian mode. And now what we have is our C dominant 7th in our Mixolydian mode. Because again, we flatten that B. So let's go ahead and listen to the C dominant 7th. So again, we'll just listen to them side by side. First, the C major 7th, followed by the C dominant 7th. C major 7th, C dominant 7th. Okay, so that was definitely, interesting, a little bit different on the ear when you start extending some of the sounds out to the 7th chords. But it is, possible to bring back that interesting resolution into a 7th chord, right? So if you're in Mixolydian, you're resolving to a dominant 7th. That's crazy, but cool, right? Because that's where Mixolydian comes in and starts adding in some hyper unique flavors to our music. So, just keep that in mind. This one, when we start dealing with changes to our tonic or changes to our dominant position, that's, you're going to get something unique in that sound from that. So that is definitely one you want to keep in mind, because playing with this one is always a good option just to explore and learn Mixolydian. Now, what I want to talk about next is our dominant position. I've already said that the tonic is extremely important, and pretty much right after that is our dominant position. In this case, we have the G. And at the top, in Ionian mode, we have a G dominant 7th. But down at the bottom, in Mixolydian mode, we have a G minor 7th. So one of the things to think about at the top with Ionian, let's say we were just using 7th chords for the sake of argument. Your chord progression could be a 1, which is C, in this case it would be C major 7th, that Ionian at the top, to a 4, let's just say F major, to your 5th, which would be a G dominant 7th, back to your 1 chord. So it's still a 1, 4, 5, and resolving back to 1, but we would go from C major 7th to F major to G dominant 7th back to C major 7th. Now just kind of think about that for a minute. At the Mixolydian, we would go from C dominant 7th to F major to a C minor 7th back to a C dominant 7th. So now we're resolving back to that C dominant 7th. So, just kind of keep that in mind, that these are, these chord progressions when they start to combine together, definitely sound pretty unique. But with that, let's go ahead and jump in and listen to the sounds of the distinct differences between G dominant 7th and G minor 7th, which we get in our Mixolydian. So let's take a listen to that now. Okay, now we're going to move to our dominant position, which in this case is G, right? Because if C is our tonic, G is our 5th, and we know that the 5th is our dominant position. And what we're going to do from there is we're going to listen to the G dominant 7th, which is what we have in our C Ionian mode, is our G dominant 7th. So let's listen to that first. But what we have in our Mixolydian mode is a G minor 7th. So let's listen to that. So again, let's listen to them side by side. We'll start off with the G dominant 7th, followed by the G minor 7th. G dominant 7th. G minor 7th. All right, so hopefully you got a good feel for some of that. Definitely play with these chords on your fretboard, but you get the idea that some of these chords start to sound kind of unique that we're going to be using in our Mixolydian as we progress in our musical journey as we start writing our own songs. So from there, what I want to do now is jump back in, and anywhere on your fretboard that you have B flat for your C Mixolydian, right? These are where you want to put it. The notes into your G or your E or your obviously your B flat. This is where you just want to play with them on the fretboard. But what I want to go over now is start talking about chord progressions. And first thing I want to look at is the differences in triads between Ionian and Mixolydian, right? Just the major triads. So we've got obviously the E minor versus the E diminished. We have the G major versus the G minor, and then we have the B diminished versus the B flat major, right? And that's our third, our fifths, and our sevenths, right? So this is kind of the distinction between these two, right? Between Ionian and Mixolydian. These are the big players. What I want to do is go ahead and jump into a chord progression that we can listen to where we are going to pay attention to that fifth, right? The 1 and the 4, that's the same, right? It's still the C major, F major, but we're going to be listening now to the differences between the fifth, which we're going to listen here in a chord progression, the difference between G major and G minor and what that does for us. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a listen to that now. All right, so the first chord progression we're going to listen to really quick is a 1-4-5-1. Pretty much standard across the board. The first thing we're going to do is listen to it in C major. So our 1 is a C major, our 4 is an F major, our 5 is a G major, and then we come back to our C major. Okay, one more time. Now what we're going to do, we're still going to do the 1-4-5 back to 1. The only difference now is our 5 is going to be a G minor. So our 1 is a C major, our 4 is an F major, our 5 is a G minor, and then we come back to C major. So this is Mixolydian. Let's listen to that again. And you hear a little bit weaker on the resolution. But again, that was our typical 1-4-5 in both Ionian and Mixolydian. Okay, that was a pretty straightforward chord progression, right? The 1-4-5. We've all heard it 1,000,001 times, but you get the difference, even in the 1-4-5, the difference between the major or Ionian mode and the Mixolydian mode, right? So with that, what I want to do now is go ahead and take a look at another chord progression, only this time what we're going to be looking at is the third, which is obviously our E minor to E diminished, as well as our fifth, which obviously G major and G minor. So we're going to combine some of these unique chords, that are very distinctly either Ionian or Mixolydian, and pairing them up. So let's go ahead and take a listen to this chord progression really quick. So now what we're going to listen to is a 1-2-3-5-1, and we're going to look at C major, D minor, E minor, G major, back to C major. So this is all 100% C Ionian. One more time. Now, let's go ahead and do that in Mixolydian. And the only difference now, we're still going to do the 1, 2, 3, 5 back to 1, but our 3 is now moving from an E minor to an E diminished, and our 5 is moving from a G major to a G minor. So let's go ahead and listen to that in Mixolydian. And one more time. One more time because I kind of messed that one up. Okay, so that should give you, pretty good feel for, some of the uniqueness between Ionian and Mixolydian, right? Definitely that resolution comes back a little bit weaker, but you still get a pretty broad piece of music. And really just to drive this home just a little bit more, we're going to look at one more chord progression. Here, we're going to be paying attention to the 5th as well as the 7th. So we're really going to pull in that B flat major as well. So let's go ahead and listen to, some really distinct characteristics of Mixolydian with this chord progression. All right, so what we're going to do now is listen to a 1, 6, 5, 7, 1 in C major, C Ionian, and that's going to be C major, A minor, G major, B diminished, back to our C major. So let's go ahead and listen to that. Strong resolution there. Let's listen to that one more time. Now let's go ahead and listen to that in Mixolydian, only this time our 5th, as opposed to a G major, is going to be G minor, and as opposed to B diminished, it's going to be B flat major. So let's go ahead and listen to that. And one more time. I slipped on that, so I'm going to do that one more time. Again, this is Mixolydian. Okay, so hopefully on that one, between these 3 kind of unique and building chord progressions, you had an opportunity to, start to understand a little bit better the differences between Ionian and Mixolydian. Now with that, for this week, a really great exercise, taking a look and expanding it out into the 7th chords, right? We've got the C major 7th versus the C dominant 7th. And we also have the G dominant 7th versus the G minor 7th. Now, when we're talking about these distinct chords for Ionian and Mixolydian, we're talking about the 1st in the scale, which is our tonic, and the 5th, our dominant, right? So expanding out the chord progressions just, a little bit, really expanding out the chords. Try that 1, 4, 5, 1, but when you hit that G, make it a G major 7th or a G minor 7th or a G dominant 7th, right? Just so you can explore and start to hear that sound even a little bit more, and you'll get comfortable with the mode just by playing with it, right? And so, here you're playing with that 5th. Now, another really good chord progression to play with is the 1, 2, 3, 5, 1. Now, from the 7th perspective, we're pretty much looking at the 1 and the 5. You can see here that I have the 3, but that just gives you an opportunity to bring in that E diminished, so you can kind of play around with it. But this is a great exercise this week. Put them together. If you haven't watched the video on the 7th chords already, check that out because it will really help you put these chord progressions together and really get you very comfortable using the Mixolydian mode. So with that, what I want to do now is, kind of talk about some of the potential challenges that modes represent and definitely something to be careful of. First off, if we look at our C major at the top of the circle of fifths and we come over clockwise a fourth over into F, well, we have our F major, right? And we can see here from F major that F major has a B flat major. It has an E diminished. It has a G minor. All of the exact same chords that we have in the Mixolydian mode, right? So when we're talking about the 7th in Mixolydian, right, we're talking about the same exact chord that is going to be our 4th in F major. So, this is something that you need to be careful because you can bring the listener back to this F major. Now, that B major is only one component. We can obviously see that there's a D minor in there and an E diminished and everything else, right? So all of the chords pretty much, they pretty much line up, and, you got to be careful. Now, the one thing that I want to point out with this on how to be careful is, if you'll notice at the top in F major, the dominant is our C, right? It's C major. And so our tonic and our dominant, once again, just by flipping them, you can very easily go into a different key. So this is where we need to be careful. And if we look at C Mixolydian, let's just say that you are using a chord progression of a 4-7-1 in C Mixolydian, right? Sounds perfectly reasonable. Where it becomes a potential issue is that technically is a 1-4-5 in F major. And as we all know, a 1-4-5, our ear will pick that up in a heartbeat. So it's very easy to lose. You thinking you're in C Mixolydian doing a 4-7-1 and the listener's hearing F major in 1-4-5. So when you're looking at the F major key in the circle of fifths, if I asked anybody in here, what's the relative minor of F major? Everyone would say D minor. You would just look at it. But if I asked everyone, what's the relative Mixolydian, that might throw some of you off. But the relative Mixolydian in F major is in fact C, right? So that's where you have to be careful with some of this stuff. And what I want to do now to just kind of help the ear out a little bit is let's listen to that chord progression so we start to understand a little bit better on where we can get lost with that. Okay, so just kind of, again, we're kind of working back at the warning sort of thing, right? What we need to be super careful of. If we do wind up with this kind of combination in our, in our piece somewhere and it cycles through, right? So we've got this F major, the B flat major, C major. You hear how nicely that resolves back to that F? One more time, we'll take a look at this. Again, F major, B flat major, C major. And that's what you need to be careful of. Even if you're looking at C Mixolydian, but if you come over to the F, follow it again, by that B flat, you can lose the listener very quickly thinking they're at a 1-4-5. So that's where you need to be careful with Mixolydian. Okay, so hopefully that that helped out a little bit, understanding how you can get back to that F major really quick. So I think with this week's conversation, we pretty much have covered Mixolydian in its entirety, and you should be able to now really start to understand some of the sounds of the Mixolydian mode, right? And where to be careful. Obviously, slipping into that, that relative major. You just got to pay attention to your chord progressions, right? And again, these chord progressions, every time you think to yourself, even what's the difference between C major and A minor, it's your chord progressions, right? And so that's really where your modes come into play. But hopefully with this this video, your ear got a little bit of a understanding of what Mixolydian kind of gives us. So you can go explore. That's how you're going to learn the modes, right? Just get in there, just jump in, and let it sound bad for a little while, because after probably 2 weeks you'll get them, as long as you're playing with them on your fretboard. So with that being said, as always, really appreciate everybody hanging out to watch these videos. If you're getting something out of them, always a huge appreciation for that thumbs up. And as always, I don't charge anything. YouTube doesn't charge anything. It's free. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe, because it's a huge help to the channel. But with that being said, really appreciate your time, and we will see you in the next videos where we start going over really our final mode of Phrygian. So with that, thanks a lot, and take care, everybody.